Hello everybody, hopefully you guys are having a good day. My name is Eddie. Welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be doing another one of my stand-up episodes where I kind of go over a feature that I've worked on or do some live coding while explaining my thought process and why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. If you like these videos, please do give the video a thumbs up or subscribe, or if not, maybe leave a comment on how I could improve the video in the future. So in this episode, well, I should take a step back. Before this episode, we didn't have a way of updating the front end when we make a change. So when we add a configuration file to our service, we don't really have a way of seeing that. And then we also didn't have a way of deleting our configuration. So we fixed that actually already, I should say. I can go to the local I can create a local cluster. Actually, we already have that, so I don't wanna double up. Let's do production cluster just so that we could differentiate between the two. And boom, bam, boom. It automatically updates right in front of our eyes. We don't have to refresh a page. We don't have to wait for content to come in. It just knows that we've added some content and it goes out and grabs that content. We also can delete them, and that will also automatically refresh our content. There we go. So, how did we do this? And the answer is TRPC. TRPC is kind of this wrapper layer around TANStack query, and TANStack query is just a way to make requests to a server API and get data back in a more effective way. We have loading states and things like that. They're kind of like server actions, but I think they're a little bit more robust. So let's get into it, and I'm seeing some stuff that I just want to remove here real quick. We're not using any of that, so we can get rid of it. And the way we go about it is, before we had this state variable for data, and this was basically everything we see here that we use to populate this. This goes and gets filled with a list of Kubernetes configs, and they all get mapped and pretty much displayed onto the screen down here. If I go just a little bit further down, we can see that we map over the kube config, the data, and then we take it as a kube config, and then we make our cards. So the one thing that we've added this time around, though, is we've added a context provider. And what a context provider does, it just allows us to, let me see if I can just draw it out for you guys, and that might help. 1920 by 1080, that's fine. Cool. Pick a cool color here. How about green? All right, so we have a component here, and we have a child component here, and then this component might have children of its own. What ends up happening is, if we want to pass data down, there's going to be a prop field that we have in our component, and we can put some data in there, and now that is available to this component here, but it's not available to these children component down here. Boom, boom. What we would like is a way to wrap some data and then have all of the information inside of there available to everything. So that is what our context provider is. We could wrap everything inside of here with a context provider. We'll say that it's C, and then we could use and then can use context, and we could pass in this context that we created into it. And basically what that will do is anywhere that we run this use context function, we'll have it available as long as that is wrapped around that context provider. For this one, it's not really necessary. I really could have just passed it in as a prop because I'm not really going many levels deep here. But in the future, I might, and also when React's compiler comes out, a lot of these context providers, I believe, are just going to be memoized, which is all about how React and Next.js is going to do rendering instead of having to render every single little element. So if we're going to go back to our thing here, if I update data up here, then this needs to re-render, this needs to re-render, this needs to re-render, right? But if I update data and only this thing needs to re-render, when the compiler comes out, everything will be memoized, so it'll be a lot better at deciding what needs to actually re-render. But that's enough of that. We can just kind of go into this trash button and talk about what it is that we really want to talk about in this video, the TRPC and that aspect of it. So what is actually going on here is that we can create these functions that are basically, we're gonna call them mutations here, and mutations are just post requests. You could do a query for a get request, you could do mutations for post requests, and it's gonna have an on success and an on error. So when it succeeds, we could run some code, and when it errors out, we could also run some code. And then if we actually look at some of these things, so like delete record, this is how when I click this button here, that record gets deleted. And basically it's going to take an input and we're going to do some validation. So our input is going to be, we're going to want a database ID and an auth token, and that database ID needs to conform to this Zod validation, and that authentication token needs to validate as well, and it needs to be a valid JWT. This is also Zod. You can look at that, and it's just a regex for Zod. Let's go back to the, where is it? API config. Right, so we're back here. So it's going to take in an input. That's the data it wants. That's what it needs to look like. If that all works out, then we can go into our actual mutation where we're going to do our query to an external API. And basically we just do the same stuff that we were doing before. I'm going to go over the get config side of things, just because that's kind of what we were looking at. So in get configs, we're going to do a mutation, and it's going to have a body. We're going to make an Axios call to our microservice or Kubernetes microservice to get all the configurations. And then we're going to return all of that data to our user. And deleting is basically the same thing. We have an auth token and a database ID. The database ID being the ID of the item, and the auth token is just how we make sure that the user is authenticated to make that request. And we send that over to the same Kubernetes, but just at a different route. And how does that look like in practice? Well, we could look at our trash button, and we see that we have this get conf, and we want to use the get user configuration ID route that we were looking at. That is all of this procedure, the input and the mutation. And we want to use the mutation On success, we want to do something, and on error, we want to also do something. And the thing that we want to do is we have that context, right? Remember I talked about this use context thing, and basically what we're saying is I want you to use the context, and the context that I want you to use is this data context. You can take a look at that, and the data context is just it's an interface that has some data, and that data is going to be a list of data items, and that data item is going to be what we get back from our API. And then it's going to also have this set data, which is going to be a React dispatch, and it's going to take in a set state action, which is also going to take in a data item on its own. And that is kind of the signature of what set state looks like when we use the set function. That is what it looks like under the hood. And then we just create that context, right? Boom, right? So that's how we set data, right? And we get the configs, but it doesn't actually look like we ever run this getConfs thing anywhere. But we can look at this one over here. This is where we delete the record by the ID. And inside of here we have, actually we can look here. When we click the button, we're gonna run this mutate, right? And it's gonna take in an auth token and the database ID. And if you remember, when we look at this actual mutation, somewhere, I think I can look at it by going here. If we look at it, it takes in a database ID and an auth token, and that's exactly what we're giving it here, an auth token and a database ID. When we click on that, it's going to run that mutation, and when it succeeds, we're going to also run a mutation, and we're going to pass in we're going to run the other mutation, the getConfs mutation, and we're going to give it an auth token. And right now we're giving it the user ID just manually. That needs to change in the future, but that's going to run. And then when that succeeds, we're going to set the data in our context provider. And we can look at one last place. For using a context, we need to wrap everything around this context provider. And basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, this is our context provider. Everything, all the children that are going to be in between this context provider are going to have access to that use context, data context thing that we looked at. And the things that are going to be inside of there are going to be data and set data, which are that use state that we created over here. Right, so we wrap that around the context provider. And we could look over here. We also have some other stuff in here. We have that getConfs by user ID mutation. So that same mutation that gets the configs by the user ID that we had in the delete button, we also have here. When it succeeds, we just set that data. We use that set data, same as everything else. And there's two places where we use it here. This use effect. So as soon as that authentication token becomes available to us, we want to run that mutation, and we want to go and grab the data. And then also, just as a extra thing somewhere in here, the form on submit data. When we hit submit on our form, hit this little blue submit button. We want to, where is it? Submit data. Once we get the return from our submit data, once our API comes back to us and tells us, hey, you sent the Kubernetes API microservice a configuration file the API told us that everything is okay, everything was submitted to the database. After everything is all said and done, we run that mutation, right? So that kind of makes sense, right? So when I click this button, when I say that I will have a local cluster, and when I submit that, boom, go and grab the data from our API. When I click this delete button, go and grab that data after you've done the delete. After the delete tells us that the data has been deleted, go and grab whatever the new data is and refresh the entire page. So hopefully that all makes sense. If you guys have any questions, please do leave them down in the comments below. If there's anything you want me to go over, or maybe some ways that I could improve this in the future, let me know in the comments down below. Leave a like if you like the video, and subscribe to the channel. It all helps out a lot. I've been liking making these for you guys, so hopefully you guys are enjoying them too. I'm gonna leave it at that. Have a great one, guys. Bye bye. Love you all.